does the law from 1669 have to do with your paycheck today? Turns out everything. You see, there's a red thread woven through American history connecting the exploitation of black labor from the very beginning to the economic reality we're all living in right now. Let's trace that thread together. And let's start right here in the now. A nearly $30,000 gap in household income. Now, that's not just a number on a chart, that's a story. That's the ghost of a history that haunts our economy every single day. Look, a gap this wide, a gap that's this persistent, it doesn't just happen by accident. That's not a glitch in the system, it is the system. It's an architecture of inequality built brick by brick, law by law. And we're about to walk through the blueprints. So let's rewind all the way back to the foundation, back to the colonial era, where the exploitation of Black bodies wasn't just a practice, it was literally written into the law of the land in blood and ink. Just look at the language in this Virginia law. It says that if an enslaved person dies during correction, well, that's not a felony. And the reasoning? Because you can't be charged with murdering your own estate, your own property. The code was clear from the jump. Black life was legally defined as a disposable asset for profit. And that law, it was just one piece of a much larger machine, the slave codes. You got to think of them as the operating system for an entire economic model. They were designed to do two things: extract the maximum amount of labor and crush any chance of rebellion by driving a legal wedge between black and poor white workers. We're really just scratching the surface here. If you want to see the original laws for yourself and get the full deep context, the complete report has the deep dive. It's all on the website. So, what happens when the system gets legally abolished in 1865? Does it just vanish? No, it just changes its clothes. The exploitation shapeshifts into new forms, just as brutal and just as profitable. Check out how fast the system adapted. The 13th Amendment comes with a loophole big enough to drive a train through, except as a punishment for crime. So, what happens? Immediately, Southern states pass these black codes that basically make it a crime to be a black person without a job. And the result? A new pipeline for forced labor, convict leasing. Freedom had a loophole, and they drove a prison train right through it. And this is what that system looked like. These are children, legally free American citizens working under armed guard on a Florida prison farm. The conditions, I mean, they're indistinguishable from a plantation. This wasn't justice. This was slavery by another name, plain and simple. Now, for those who avoided the convict lease system, there was another trap waiting: sharecropping. It was sold as a step up from slavery, a chance at economic independence. But really, it was just a new form of bondage, a system of debt peonage that locked Black families into a cycle of poverty on the very same land their ancestors had been enslaved on. All right, let's move forward because we got to see how this builds. Black workers, they never stopped fighting back. They organized, they migrated north, they demanded their rights. But every single step forward on that long road, it came with a price. It came with a compromise that often left the most vulnerable behind. Take the New Deal in the 1930s. It was supposed to build America's modern social safety net, a huge step for labor. But there was a catch. To get the votes of Southern segregationists, a deal was cut. They agreed to exclude two groups from all the new protections: farm workers and domestic workers. And who held those jobs? The vast majority of Black Americans. So they built this safety net, then cut holes in it just big enough for most Black folks to fall right through. But you had leaders like A. Philip Randolph, the great organizer of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, who understood the truth. They knew that you couldn't build real labor power on a foundation of racial division. They fought for an inclusive movement because they knew that a rising tide had to lift all boats, or the entire ship would just stay stuck in the mud of exploitation. Okay, so let's bring it all home because these historical patterns, they aren't just in the history books. They're alive and well. The logic of the plantation is now coded into the algorithms of our modern economy. For a time, unions were an absolutely powerful engine for building a Black middle class. But starting in the 1980s, union power was systematically attacked and broken. And you can see it right here. Black union membership was cut by more than half. The key rudder to economic security was just kicked out from under generations of Black workers. Now, fast forward to the pandemic, and you see the modern echo. Black workers were massively overrepresented in jobs we started calling essential. But what that really meant was expendable. High risk, Low pay, minimal protections. The work is essential, but the worker is disposable. That's the exact same logic from 1669, just playing out in this century. So, what does this look like today? Well, mass incarceration continues the legacy of convict leasing, extracting labor for pennies an hour. The gig economy uses misclassification to strip workers of their rights, calling them contractors instead of employees, the same way a sharecropper was just a tenant. And decades of deregulation have shredded the safety net, leaving the most vulnerable workers totally exposed. The language has changed, but the underlying logic is exactly the same: maximum profit from labor with minimum accountability. We've traced the connections here, but the deep data, the numbers that show exactly how these policies create these gaps, that's all in the full report. I really encourage you to check it out. And so we end where we began. Just look at this line. This scat is the ghost of the Casual Killing Act. It's the ghost of the Black Codes, of the New Deal's racist compromise, of every union that was busted and every protection that was rolled back. It is the accumulated interest on a debt this country has never truly paid. This history isn't just something to know, it's a reality we have to confront. Because if this system was built piece by piece, then it can be unbuilt. The only question is, do we have the will to do it? This was just the introduction. The full analysis, the complete story. If aim a legacy of racialized labor report, go deeper, get the receipts, continue the reflection.